There are some secrets that don't explode when a person is alive. They wait. They sit in quiet rooms. They hide in drawers that smell like cedar and dust. And then, after the funeral flowers start to wilt and the casseroles stop coming, they open like a second grave. My brother David never married. He lived in the same pale gray house for 40 years. He saved every penny. We thought he was lonely. We thought he was frugal. We thought we knew him. But 3 days after we buried him, I sat at his kitchen table with an old blue life insurance folder in my hands and found the name of a woman no one in our family had ever heard before. Elena. And before this night is over, you'll understand why that one name changed everything I believed about my brother. Because by morning, I would have to ask a question that made me sick to even think. Who was David really living for? Remember this, we thought he was saving money. He was saving something else. The day I found the folder, the house still smelled like the funeral. Not flowers exactly. More like damp wool coats, cold coffee, and that faint powdery scent from sympathy cards stacked on a counter. It was late afternoon, and the winter light came in thin through the blinds, striping the kitchen table like prison bars. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked too loudly. Every sound felt rude. David's house had always been neat in a way that made you lower your voice without meaning to. The same brown recliner. The same lamp with the crooked shade. The same jar of instant coffee by the stove, even though I'm not sure anyone under the age of 80 still bought it. He liked things to last. Shoes resoled. Coats patched at the elbow. Rubber bands saved in a ceramic mug. He treated every object like it had earned the right to stay. I was the one left to sort his paperwork because I was the practical one. That's what families call you when you're the one who doesn't cry until later. My name is Claire. I'm younger than David by 8 years. Growing up, he was less like a brother and more like a weather system. Quiet. Reliable. Hard to read. He never yelled. Never made a scene. But he could step into a room and make all the chaos settle just by being there. And still none of us ever said he was happy. That's the ugly truth. We pitied him. At family dinners, my cousins would talk about vacations and kids' soccer schedules and kitchen remodels, and David would just sit there in his buttoned cardigan, nodding, cutting his roast into perfect squares. He brought practical gifts. Flashlights. Tire gauges. Once he gave me a fireproof document box for Christmas. I laughed about it for years. Now I'd give anything to hear him explain why. I had made little piles on the table, bank statements, utility bills, tax records, receipts so faded they looked embarrassed to still exist. Then I found the blue folder. It was tucked beneath a stack of appliance manuals in a drawer beside the fridge. Of course it was. David could hide a diamond in a box of extension cord warranties, and no one would ever think to look there. The folder was old, soft at the corners, the color of a storm cloud over water. When I opened it, the paper crackled with age. I could smell dry ink and attic dust. The policy started in 1985. My eyes caught on that year first. 1985. David would have been 27. Then I saw the beneficiary line. I remember the exact way my stomach dropped. Not dramatic. Not a movie jolt. More like missing a stair in the dark. Beneficiary Elena M. Navarro. I read it once. Twice. A third time slower. Not me. Not our parents. Not a charity. A woman. A stranger. Outside, a car passed over wet pavement, hissing softly. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked twice and stopped. Inside that kitchen, I suddenly felt like I was trespassing in my own brother's life. Elena, I said out loud, and my voice sounded wrong in the room. That was when my friend Margot came in through the back door without knocking, carrying a grocery bag and the kind of energy grief hates but secretly needs. Margot has been my best friend since high school, the kind of woman who can insult your curtains, fix your printer, and save your life in the same 10 minutes. I brought soup, crackers, and the good kind of paper towels, she said, shrugging off her coat. Not the cheap ones David would have bought. I didn't laugh. She stopped. What happened? I turned the folder toward her. Do you know an Alina Navarro? She set the grocery bag down slowly. Should I? It's his life insurance. He's been paying this policy since 1985. And he left it to her. Margot leaned over, reading. The plastic bag rustled. The fluorescent light above the sink buzzed. Time did that strange stretching thing it does before bad possibilities take shape. Then Margot looked at me with that careful face people use when they're trying not to say the obvious. Oh, she said. That one word lit every ugly suspicion at once. A secret girlfriend. A second family. Some hidden life while we all sat around feeling sorry for the bachelor who brought practical gifts. I hated that my first feeling wasn't grief. It was betrayal. I pushed back from the table so hard the chair legs screeched against the linoleum. No, I said, though I didn't know what I was arguing with. No, David wasn't. Wasn't what? Margot asked softly. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. I only knew I suddenly remembered little things I had never questioned. The times he missed Thanksgiving because he had to work. The cash withdrawals. The old photo envelopes with dates but no labels. The locked hall closet he never let anyone open. Small things. Forgettable things. Until they weren't. Margot touched the edge of the folder. Claire, are there any other papers in there? I looked down. There were. A few policy updates. Premium notices. And tucked deep into the back flap something else. An envelope. Yellowed. Sealed. No stamp. No address. Just David's handwriting on the front, and when I saw what he had written, the room seemed to tilt. Because on that envelope were 4 words that made Alina feel less like a mistress. And more like a ghost, to be opened only if I'm gone. Remember this? We thought he was saving money. He was saving something else. And whatever was inside that envelope was about to tell me who Alina really was. There are objects that feel heavier than paper should. That envelope was one of them. It lay on David's kitchen table between a soup cracker crumb and a utility bill, and somehow it seemed to bend the light around it. The room smelled like chicken broth now and lemon dish soap, and the wet wool of Margot's coat hanging by the door. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window over the sink. Inside, the clock kept ticking as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Because my dead brother had left behind a sealed message, a stranger's name, and one warning written in his own careful hand, to be opened only if I'm gone. And I already knew that whatever waited inside would either save him or ruin him. Remember this? We thought he was saving money. He was saving something else. My fingers hovered over the flap, but I didn't open it. Not yet. I wish I could tell you I was brave. That I tore it open right there and faced whatever truth came out. But grief does strange things to courage. It makes you crave answers and fear them at the same time. Margot pulled out a chair across from me and sat down without making a sound. She had that steady way of looking at a problem, as if all disasters were just closets that needed organizing. Well, she said gently, either he left you a confession or instructions. Those are not equally comforting options. No. She folded her hands. But one of them is still better than guessing all night. Guessing had already started chewing holes in me. I looked around David's kitchen. The pale linoleum, the wooden fruit bowl that never held fruit, the faded curtains with tiny blue flowers our mother had sewn in 1992. This room had always felt so explainable. So ordinary. A room where a man ate canned soup and balanced a checkbook and went to bed by 10. Not a room where secrets survived for 40 years. I reached for the envelope, then stopped again. There was a memory pressing at me now, something small and annoying like a song lyric you almost remember. I looked back at the insurance policy. 1985. That year sat there like a lit match, David at 27. Me at 19, away at community college for one chaotic semester before I came back home. Mom working double shifts at the nursing home. Dad already sick, though we were still pretending he wasn't. It had been a hard year. Loud in some ways, quiet in others, and David had changed that year. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. He just got more tired. More private. He took on more hours at the hardware store, then started doing night inventory somewhere else. He said he was getting ahead. That was David's phrase for everything. Need new tires, getting ahead. Skip dinner out, getting ahead. Work until your eyes burn, getting ahead. I used to roll my eyes at it. Now it sounded different. Margot noticed my face change. What, 1985, I said. That's when this started. And that's when he started working nights, she nodded once. Then maybe this is connected, maybe. Or maybe I was doing what grieving people do, turning old dust into patterns because randomness feels crueler than betrayal. I slid one finger under the flap, and then the phone rang. I jumped so hard I nearly knocked over the folder. The shrill sound cut through the kitchen like an alarm. Margot muttered, "Of course," and reached for it before I could. It was my cousin Neil. He wanted to know if David had a suit suitable for donation, or if one of those old man stores would even take it. I stared at Margot while she handled him in that polite but murderous tone she reserves for people who become logistical the minute someone dies. I could hear rain in the gutter now, faster. I could smell the pepper from the soup she had opened, but neither of us had touched. And all at once I felt furious. Not at Neil. Not really. At all of us, at how easily we had reduced David to a category. The careful brother. The odd bachelor. The man with sensible shoes and no story worth asking about. What if he had spent his whole life trying to say something and none of us had learned his language? Margot hung up and set the receiver down. He is, as always, impossible. I gave a tired laugh through my nose. Then I opened the envelope. The paper inside was folded in thirds. One sheet only. Cream-colored, thick, older than the envelope looked. I unfolded it carefully. My fingertips could feel the raised grain of the page. The first line was in David's handwriting. "Claire, if you are reading this, then I never found the courage to explain." My mouth went dry. I kept reading. The beneficiary listed on the policy is not someone I betrayed the family with. She is not a woman I lived with, married, or hid in shame. If you have found her name, then you deserve enough truth to know that what I did because I believed it was the least selfish thing I had ever done. I stopped. Margot leaned forward. Keep going, but my eyes had snagged on one phrase. The least selfish thing. It didn't sound like a love affair. It sounded worse. Or better. I couldn't tell. I read the next lines aloud because somehow hearing his words in the room made him feel less gone. In 1985, a child was born. Her name was Alina. For reasons you may not understand at first, my name could not follow her where she was going. But I made a promise that day. If I could not be her father in the light, I would be her provider in the dark. The rain hit harder against the window. I heard Margot inhale sharply. Somewhere in the house, a pipe knocked once in the wall. A child. Alina wasn't his lover, she was his daughter. The word moved through me like cold water. Daughter. My brother had a daughter. My brother had a whole human being in the world, and none of us knew. Or maybe an uglier thought, somebody knew and I didn't. I kept reading, heart hammering now. There are papers that explain more. I could never destroy them. I told myself I was keeping records. The truth is I was keeping courage for a day I feared would come too late. Look in the cedar chest upstairs. Under the winter blankets. There is a photograph and there is a letter I never mailed. Start there. That was all. No apology. No names beyond Alina. No explanation of who the mother was or why his name could not follow her. Just a door cracked open. Just enough truth to make the rest unbearable. Margot stood first. Upstairs, she said. I stayed frozen, because now that the mystery had changed shape, it hurt in a different place. Betrayal was easy compared to this. Betrayal lets you be angry. This was grief with awe mixed into it. This was realizing the man we had called lonely had been carrying a secret love so large it reorganized his entire life. And if David had spent 40 years providing for a daughter who never knew his name, then every cheap coat, every skipped vacation, every extra shift, every practical Christmas gift suddenly meant something else. Remember this, we thought he was saving money. He was saving something else. I rose from the table. The house creaked softly around us as if listening. The stairway beyond the kitchen looked darker than it had an hour ago. And upstairs, inside a cedar chest that still smelled like winter and old wood, and the years my brother never explained, there was a photograph waiting to tell me whose eyes Alina had. And maybe worse, whose heartbreak she carried. Some discoveries don't arrive like thunder. They arrive like a scent. Cedar. Cold air. Old will. The upstairs hallway in David's house smelled exactly the way it did when we were kids, as if time had been folded and stored there with the blankets. Margot was 2 steps ahead of me, one hand on the banister, the floorboards groaning under us. Downstairs the refrigerator still hummed. Rain still whispered at the windows. But upstairs in that dim yellow light, the house felt less like a place we inherited, and more like a witness. David had a daughter. That truth was already enough to split my memory in 2. But he had also left me a trail. A cedar chest. A photograph. A letter he never mailed. And I knew before I even touched the latch that whatever lay inside would not just tell me who Alina was. It would tell me who David had been forced to become. Remember this, we thought he was saving money. He was saving something else. The chest sat at the foot of his bed beneath the window, plain and square and old-fashioned, the kind people keep because it still works. Rain traced silver lines down the glass. The room smelled faintly of starch, book paper, and the peppermint balm David always kept on his nightstand in winter. The bed was made so neatly it looked untouched, corners tucked with military precision. A folded cardigan lay across the chair by the dresser, as if he had just stepped into the next room and might come back annoyed to find us there. Margot knelt and lifted the lid. The hinges gave a low, tired creak. The smell hit first. Cedar and mothballs and old cotton. It smelled like every winter we'd ever survived. Inside were blankets stacked in careful layers. 2 plaid wool ones. A green quilt our mother made from old shirts. A cream-colored afghan with one corner unraveling. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic until Margot lifted the quilt. There, flat at the bottom, was a large manila envelope. And on top of it, a photograph. I knew David's hands the way you know a familiar song. Even in a picture, I recognized them first. Broad palms. Slightly nicked knuckles. The way he always held fragile things as if they deserved an apology for the world. In the photo, he was young. Maybe 27, maybe 28. Thicker hair. No gray at the temples. He was sitting in a metal hospital chair beside a window with horizontal blinds. The light was pale and clinical. And in his arms was a newborn wrapped in a pink-striped hospital blanket. Elena. My knees actually weakened. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. David wasn't smiling the way people smile for cameras. He looked wrecked. Odd. Terrified. His eyes were red, as if he'd been crying or hadn't slept. But his face had a tenderness I had never seen in life because maybe no one had ever looked for it. And the baby. She was tiny, eyes closed, fist tucked near her chin. A whole hidden branch of our family tree in one small bundle. Oh, David, I whispered. Margot sat beside me without speaking. That was one of the reasons I loved her. She knew when silence was part of the work. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in David's handwriting, were 6 words, the first and last time. I closed my eyes. That line hurt more than anything so far. Not because it was dramatic. David didn't do dramatic. Because it was plain. Final. The kind of sentence a person writes only after deciding to survive something by becoming smaller around it. Margot picked up the manila envelope and handed it to me. My hands felt clumsy now, too warm. Inside were 3 things. An adoption agency letter. A carbon copy of a form. And a sealed envelope addressed in David's handwriting but never stamped. I opened the agency letter first. The paper had yellowed at the folds. The type was old, the kind that left little dents in the page. I scanned it once, then had to start over because my eyes were moving faster than my mind. The letter thanked Mr. David Mercer for his cooperation with a confidential placement arrangement. It referred to the child known at birth as Elena M. It stated that, per the signed agreement, identifying contact would remain sealed unless initiated through proper legal channels at a future date. It acknowledged receipt of a trust contribution. And then one line, halfway down, caught in my throat. Your request that educational support be maintained anonymously has been recorded. Educational support. Anonymously. Not just life insurance. This had started from the beginning. He set up money for her from birth, Margot said quietly. I nodded, unable to answer. The carbon copy was worse. It was a form, partially smudged, with checkboxes and legal language and too much empty space around the human ache of it. Father's name, David Mercer. Mother's name, redacted by time or maybe by David himself. Thick black ink covered most of it. But not all. One letter remained visible. L, that was it. One stubborn initial peeking through the black, and suddenly, with no warning, a memory snapped into place. Summer of 1985. Heat pressing against window screens. The smell of cut grass and gasoline. Me on the front porch painting my toenails a terrible coral color. David pulling up in his truck after dark, not alone. A young woman in the passenger seat. Light hair. White blouse. Her face turned away. I had called through the screen, "Who's that?" And David had answered too fast, "Just someone from work." L. Someone from work. A woman whose name I never learned because I was 19 and self-absorbed, and believed every family secret was my business only if it interrupted dinner. Margot saw my face. You remembered something, maybe, I said. A woman back then. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered to him, yes. That was the part clawing at me now. Everything had mattered to him. We just hadn't known the shape of it. I picked up the final envelope, the one he had never mailed. The paper was thicker, newer than the others. On the front, written in the same careful print as the first envelope downstairs, were the words, "For Elena if she ever wants the truth." I stared at it. Rain rattled briefly against the window, then softened. In the next room, something in the old radiator clicked. The whole house seemed to lean inward. "Open it," Margot said. I looked at her. "It wasn't written to me." "No," she said. "But he left it where you would find it." That's its own kind of permission. My thumb traced the edge of the seal. I thought of David at 27 in a hospital chair holding his daughter for the first and last time. I thought of him working double shifts while we joked about his cheapness. I thought of every birthday card with $20 tucked inside for my kids, every repaired toaster, every careful silence. Then I broke the seal. Inside was a letter several pages long. The first line began, "Alina, if this letter has reached you, then something finally happened that I feared and hoped for in equal measure." And by the bottom of the first page, I found the sentence that changed the mystery again. Because David didn't give her up simply because he was poor. He gave her up because someone had threatened to take her away forever. And the person who made that threat was someone our family knew. There are truths that don't just answer a question. They accuse you. They make the room smaller. They turn memory into evidence. I was sitting on the edge of David's bed with his unopened life folded around me, cedar in the air, rain needling the window, the lamp beside his nightstand casting that tired yellow glow he always preferred over bright bulbs. Margot sat beside me, one hand braced on the quilt, while I held the letter David had written for Alina but never mailed. My brother's words were on the page. His voice was suddenly in the room. And at the end of the first page, he revealed the thing I was least prepared to hear. He did not lose his daughter only to poverty or youth or bad timing. He lost her because someone pressured him into silence. Someone told him that if he fought, Alina could disappear forever. And the person behind that threat was not some faceless lawyer or stranger from an agency. It was someone tied to us. Someone from our world. Someone whose name, once I read it, made me understand why David had swallowed this secret for 40 years. Remember this, we thought he was saving money. He was saving something else. My eyes kept moving over the line, but my mind resisted it. I read aloud, my voice thinner than I meant it to be. Your mother's family had more money than mine, more influence than mine, and more certainty that I was not fit to belong in the future they wanted for her. They believed they could erase me cleanly if they moved fast enough. The woman who made that plainest to me was Lorraine Kessler. Lorraine. The name landed like a dropped plate. I knew that name not well. Not intimately. But enough. Lorraine Kessler had been the supervisor at the nursing home where my mother worked in the mid-80s. Sharp hair. Hard lipstick. Crisp skirts that sounded like paper when she walked. She was the kind of woman who smiled with only her teeth. And if this was the same Lorraine, and in my bones I knew it was, then the redacted L on the adoption form suddenly looked less like the child's mother and more like the architect of the separation. Margot frowned. That name means something to you. She knew Mom, I said. At the nursing home. She used to come by the house once in a while. Fundraisers, calls, work things. I always hated her. Promising start, Margot muttered. I kept reading. She told me there would be no place for me in Alina's life. She said if I made trouble, her family would relocate the child through channels I would never be able to follow. She said the kindest thing I could do was sign, stay quiet, and become useful from a distance. I believed she was cruel. I also believed she had the power to do exactly what she said. The rain thinned outside to a hush. The house settled with a low wooden pop somewhere in the walls. I could smell old cedar and the faint medicinal scent of David's peppermint balm. And under all of it there was a growing shame in me, metallic and hot. Because I remembered Lorraine. I remembered the day she came to our house in August of 1985. The air conditioner had broken. The whole house smelled like warm dust and sweet tea. My mother was in the kitchen with Lorraine, speaking in low, tense voices. I had passed by and heard Lorraine say, "The boy needs to think long-term." The boy. David. At the time, I thought they were talking about his second job. Or Dad's medical bills. Something adult and boring and none of my business. Now I knew better. I turned the page. I have replayed that week more times than I can count. I was young but not too young to love you. I was poor but not too poor to work. What I lacked was power. And when power speaks in a calm voice, fear can sound like reason. I had to stop. That sentence was David all over. No drama. No self-pity. Just the cleanest knife possible. Margot took the letter from my shaking hand for a second, looked at me, then gave it back. You okay? No, I said honestly. And I wasn't. Because another memory had surfaced, uglier than the first. A week after that kitchen conversation, I had walked past David's room late at night and heard him crying. Not loud. That wasn't him. Just one choked sound, then silence. I had stood in the hallway with my hand on the frame and then kept walking. Kept walking because in our family, pain that wasn't bleeding got left alone. I looked down at the letter again. I met your adoptive placement only once from across a parking lot. A station wagon, cream-colored. Your blanket folded beside a car seat. I was not allowed to approach. Lorraine said that seeing me would complicate attachment, as if love were a paperwork issue. But I saw your hand. That is the truth. I saw your hand move, and I decided that if I could not be present, I would still be of use. Of use. That was how David had translated fatherhood into something he believed he was allowed to perform. Quietly. Reliably. From the shadows. I swallowed hard and continued. The first educational trust was small. I built it with overtime from the hardware store and stockroom work at night. Later there were scholarships rooted through the agency and then through other channels. I checked on your progress only when it could be done without touching your life. I know the schools you attended. I know that by 12 you liked science. I know you won a county essay prize at 14. I know you went to college. If this sounds like a stranger's record keeping, that is because strangers were the only shape left to me. I pressed my fist against my mouth. This was not a hidden scandal. It was a hidden devotion. It was my brother building a father's love out of legal distance, night shifts, and whatever scraps of news he could gather without ruining her life. Margot's voice softened. Claire, he followed her. No, I said, tears finally stinging. He protected her. And then the letter shifted again, because halfway through the next page, David left grief behind and gave me direction. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you may decide to leave the past buried. I would understand. But if kindness outruns caution, go to the address in the enclosed note. It is the last verified office tied to the placement records. Ask for Mrs. Alvarez if she is still living. She once told me that paper walls eventually crack. She may remember how to find the truth. There was an enclosed note folded into the back page. I nearly missed it. A smaller slip of paper, brittle and yellowed, with a typed address in Ohio and a handwritten name beneath it, Mrs. Teresa Alvarez. Below that, in David's handwriting, she was kind when kindness was expensive. Margot stood up immediately. Ohio, I looked up at her. You're saying that like we're going, we are going. It's the middle of the night, it is 8:15, it feels like the middle of my life. That too, she said. But Claire, listen to me. Your brother left a map. We can sit here and drown in it, or we can follow it. That was Margot. My lovable bulldozer. The side character heaven sends when the main character is too grief-struck to move. I laughed once through tears. A ridiculous broken little sound. Then I looked back at the letter one last time. The final lines on that page read, if Alina is well, say nothing that disturbs her peace unless she asks for it. But if she ever wondered whether she was forgotten, tell her this. I arranged my whole life around the privilege of not forgetting. That did it. I bent forward, crying into a cardigan that still smelled faintly like David's soap, clean cotton, peppermint, and the cold outside air he always carried in with him. Margot rubbed circles on my back and let me fall apart for exactly 1 minute before she switched back into motion. "Pack a bag," she said. "Bring the letters, the photo, and your charger." "I'm making coffee," I wiped my face. "You don't even know if this Mrs. Alvarez is alive." "No," Margot said, already heading for the stairs. "But I know regret is." And as I sat there in David's carefully ordered room, holding the paper trail of a love he had hidden in plain sight, I realized the next chapter would not happen in this house. It would happen on the road. In another state. At an old office where the paper walls might finally crack. And if Teresa Alvarez remembered the little girl David spent 40 years protecting from a distance, then by tomorrow night, I might be standing within reach of Alina herself. Part 5. The Guardian Angel. By dawn, the world smelled like gas station coffee, wet asphalt, and the kind of hope you don't trust yet. Margot and I were already on the highway, David's letters zipped inside my bag, the old blue insurance folder on the seat between us like a third passenger. The sky was the color of aluminum. Trucks hissed past on rain-dark roads. Somewhere behind us was my brother's quiet house, his folded cardigans, his unopened rooms. Somewhere ahead of us was Ohio. A name. A woman who might remember. And maybe, if paper walls really do crack, a daughter who had spent her whole life receiving love from a man she never got to know. I had thought the worst thing I might discover about David was that he had lied to us. Instead, mile by mile, I was learning the more painful truth. He had told the world less so someone else could have more. And before that day was over, I would stand in front of Alina and learn whether 40 years of hidden sacrifice could still reach a human heart after the man who made it was gone. Remember this, we thought he was saving money. He was saving something else. The old office wasn't really an office anymore. By the time we found the address from David's note, late morning light had broken through in pale strips, and the rain had thinned to a mist. The building sat on a tired street between a vacuum repair shop and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and butter. The sign out front had been replaced years ago. No adoption agency. No record center. Just a family counseling practice with frosted windows and a potted plant that looked exhausted. For one terrible second, I thought we had come all this way for nothing. Then Margot, who has never respected despair when there's a receptionist nearby, marched us inside. The waiting room smelled like carpet cleaner and stale tea. A small tabletop fountain trickled in the corner, trying very hard to be calming. Behind the desk sat a woman in reading glasses and a lavender sweater, probably in her 60s. Her name tag said Patricia. Margot gave her the smile she uses when she intends to bulldoze politely. "We're looking for Teresa Alvarez." Patricia looked up. "May I ask why?" I set the blue folder on the counter and slid David's note toward her. My hands were shaking again. "My brother passed away," I said. "We found records. Teresa Alvarez's name was with them. We think she may have helped place a child in 1985. Patricia's eyes moved over the note. Something in her face changed. "She's retired," she said carefully. "Very retired. 90, I think. But wait here." She disappeared through a side door. I could hear muted voices, then silence, then the distant squeak of a file cabinet. A child laughed somewhere in the hallway. The fountain kept trickling. The smell of cinnamon from next door drifted in every time the outer door opened. Hope started to feel dangerous again. Patricia returned with a thin woman in a navy cardigan, small and upright despite her age. White hair. Steady eyes. She leaned on a cane but carried herself like someone who had spent a lifetime refusing to be rushed. "Mrs. Alvarez?" I asked. "I'm Teresa," she said. Her voice was soft but unsentimental. "You said 1985. I nodded and handed her the photograph of David holding the baby. The moment she saw it, her face opened with recognition. Not surprise. Recognition, oh, she whispered. That poor boy, I felt the air leave my lungs. She led us into a small office that smelled like old paper, peppermint, and radiator heat. There were 2 framed landscapes on the wall, and a box of tissues placed exactly where grief could reach them. Teresa sat behind the desk, looked at David's photo again, and rested her thumb over the corner of it as if blessing it. I remember him, she said. He came in with hands that would not stop shaking. He kept asking the same question. What question? I asked. She looked at me directly. How do I make sure she never pays for my weakness? I closed my eyes. That was David. Even at his most broken, his fear bent outward. Toward the child. Teresa told us what she could. Not everything. Time had taken some details, and law had sealed others. But enough remained. The child's mother came from a powerful local family. Young. Pressured. Surrounded by people who called control protection. Lorraine Kessler had not been the mother. She had been the mother's aunt. The family enforcer. The practical face of a cruel decision. They believed your brother would complicate everything, Teresa said. He had no money. No status. No leverage. But he had 2 things that unsettled them. A conscience and persistence. What happened to Alina's mother? I asked. Teresa took a slow breath. She signed under pressure. And she died not long after, car accident. The room went still. So David lost both of them. Not at once. But completely. I thought of that hospital photo again. The rawness in his face. The tenderness. The grief already beginning. And Alina, I asked. Teresa studied me for a second, deciding. Then she opened a drawer and took out a slip of paper. She reached out through formal channels years ago, she said. Not to find him exactly. More to understand the scholarships. There were procedures, complications, things stalled. But she left professional contact information in case verified family ever needed to reach her. She slid the paper across the desk, a hospital name. A city. A department. And beneath it, Dr. Alina Navarro. I stared at it so long the letters started to blur. A doctor. My brother, with his patched elbows and instant coffee and second jobs, had quietly financed a doctor. Margot made the call because my voice was gone. She stepped into the hall, came back 3 minutes later and said, she can see us. Today she has 1 hour between shifts. Of course she did. The hidden child had become the kind of adult whose time saves lives. The hospital smelled like antiseptic, coffee, and overheated air. Monitors beeped faintly behind curtains. Shoes squeaked on polished floors. In the lobby, afternoon sun poured through tall windows and turned everyone briefly gold. I remember thinking that grief should not be allowed in places this bright, but there it was, walking beside me anyway. A nurse led us to a consultation room near the pediatric wing. Pediatric. I don't know why that detail undid me, but it did. Maybe because caregiving had always been David's secret language, and here was the life it had helped build, someone caring for children with the future he had assembled in pieces. Then the door opened. Alina was taller than I expected. Early 40s maybe. Dark hair pulled back. Tired eyes in the way all good doctors have tired eyes, used, alert kind. She wore navy scrubs under a white coat, and there was a faint crease between her brows like her face had learned concentration long before rest. And the shocking part was this, I knew her not from memory. From resemblance, David's eyes. Not the exact shape, but the same stillness in them. The same careful attention, as if looking itself were a form of responsibility. She glanced from me to Margot to the folder in my hands. I'm Dr. Navarro, she said. Patricia said this was about family records. I stood, but my knees nearly failed me. My name is Claire Mercer, I said. David Mercer was my brother. Her face changed, but only slightly. A controlled person absorbing impact. She sat down slowly. David Mercer, she repeated. That name was in one sealed note years ago. Very little information. Just enough to suggest. She stopped. Is he alive? The room held its breath. No, I said. That one word seemed to pull something loose in her, though she didn't cry. Not yet. She just looked down at her hands for a moment, and when she looked back up, her voice was quieter. I always wondered whether I was too late. I set the photograph in front of her first, David in the hospital chair. Baby Alina in his arms. She touched the edge of it with 2 fingertips. Her composure cracked visibly. That's me, she whispered. Yes, that's him. Yes. For a moment the only sound was the distant roll of a cart in the hallway and the soft hiss of hospital ventilation. The room smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and paper, and the coffee cooling in Alina's untouched cup. Then she laughed once through a breath that was almost a sob. My whole life, she said, things kept appearing. Tuition assistance. Book grants. A science camp. Then a scholarship in college from a fund with no donor listed. Every time I reached a wall, something opened. I used to joke that I had a guardian angel with an accountant. I started crying before she did, because there it was. The payoff David never got to hear. Not forgotten. Not wasted. Not invisible. I brought his letter, I said. She covered her mouth. Then nodded. I gave it to her, the one he wrote for Alina if she ever wanted the truth. She read in silence. Once she reached the line, I arranged my whole life around the privilege of not forgetting. Her shoulders folded inward and the tears came, quiet and unstoppable. Margot, bless her relentless practical heart, slid the tissue box across the table without a word. When Alina could speak again, she told us pieces of her life. Adoptive parents who loved her well. A childhood that was stable, if never entirely free of questions. A habit of working too hard. A pull toward pediatrics because, in her words, kids deserve one adult who stays. I nearly broke all over again hearing that. Then I told her about David. The gray house. The patch coats. The practical gifts. The hardware store. The night stockroom. The way he lived like a man carrying a promise in both hands. And when I finished, Alina looked at the photo once more and said the line I think I will hear for the rest of my life. He wasn't absent, she said softly. He was translated, that was it. The whole tragedy and beauty in one sentence. Not absent. Translated. Into tuition. Into chances. Into a life with white coats and pediatric hallways and children who got to keep breathing because a man in a cardigan decided love could still work from the dark. We spent another hour together. More than an hour, maybe. Time had gone soft by then. Alina asked if she could come see David's house someday. I told her yes before she finished asking. She asked what he liked to eat, what music he played, whether he ever laughed hard. I told her about his terrible dance moves in the kitchen one Christmas after too much eggnog, and the way he always cried at animal rescue commercials but denied it. We gave her back a father in stories. And she gave him back to me as a man I had never fully seen. When we finally left the hospital, evening had turned the parking lot amber. The air smelled like cold concrete and car exhaust, and the first hint of spring buried under winter. Margot unlocked the car, then stopped and looked at me. You okay? I looked up at the sky and thought about David. About how close we had come to reducing him to the saddest version of himself. About how often ordinary-looking people are carrying epics no one bothers to ask about. No, I said, and this time I smiled. But I understand him now. On the drive home, I held the blue folder in my lap and watched darkness gather over the road. Headlights streaked past. The heater clicked softly. Margot ate pretzels with the concentration of a woman who had emotionally co-piloted enough for one day. And I kept thinking the same thing. Families are not built only by blood. They are built by sacrifice, by hidden labor, by people who keep showing up in forms the world doesn't always recognize. David never got the public reckoning he deserved while he was alive. No applause. No reunion scene. No one stood in a crowded room and called him heroic, but a doctor in a pediatric wing knew now. A daughter knew. And I knew, so let me leave you with the truth my brother spent 40 years proving in silence. Blood makes us related. Sacrifice makes us family. And if you still have a sibling you haven't called, someone you think you understand because you grew up in the same house, call them. Call them before their life becomes a box of papers and one impossible name. Because sometimes the quietest person in the family is carrying the biggest story. If you want, I can also turn all 5 parts into one polished, continuous YouTube voiceover script with smoother transitions between parts.